You already know about the oil. 20% of the world's seaborne crude. 1,000 tankers sitting in a Gulf-sized parking lot because Iran decided geography was its deadliest weapon. We've covered the fast attack boats, the F-18S turning Iranian rudders into Swiss cheese with a 20-millimeter cannon, which, if you haven't seen that footage, is something else. The blockade, the ceasefire that's running on fumes. But here's the thing. While every news camera on the planet is aimed at the waterline, Iran is looking at something underneath it. Something that nobody is briefing you on. Something that, if Iran actually pulls the trigger on it, doesn't just slow down oil shipments. It doesn't just spike gas prices. It breaks the internet. Not metaphorically. Literally. There are 7 fiber-optic cables sitting on the floor of the Strait of Hormuz right now. 7 cables threading between Asia, Europe, and the Gulf states, carrying more than $10 trillion in financial transactions every single day. Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, all of it running through seabeds that sit right next to Iranian territorial waters. And the IRGC just started doing the math, because last week, Iranian military spokesperson Ibrahim Zolgari posted on X, publicly, on record, that Iran will, quote, impose fees on internet cables. And state-linked media didn't stop there. They went further, suggesting that cable companies refusing to comply could face, quote, direct or indirect damage. Direct or indirect damage on cables carrying $10 trillion a day. That's not a press release. That's a ransom note. So today we are going all the way to the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to cover the Ghadir-class mini-submarine, the weapon that's been sitting quietly on the Persian Gulf floor that nobody is talking about. The autonomous systems the U.S. military has ready to counter it, including Lockheed Martin's Lamprey, an underwater unmanned vehicle that essentially latches onto submarines like a deep-sea leech and doesn't let go, and DARPA's Manta Ray. We're going to cover exactly what the undersea targeting chain looks like if this escalates. And then about 3/4 of the way through, we bring back the global roundup, the breaking stories from around the world you need to know. And we close with the 4D chess strategic analysis on what Iran's cable threat actually means for the endgame of this conflict. Let's go. First, the operational picture, because a lot has shifted in the last 18 hours and you need the full context before we go underwater. President Trump posted on Truth Social that he had been personally asked by the Emir of Qatar, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and the President of the UAE to hold off on a planned military strike against Iran, a strike that was apparently scheduled for today. He said serious negotiations are now underway, and that in the opinion of those leaders, a deal is reachable that would be very acceptable to the United States and to the broader Middle East. And crucially, Trump confirmed that the deal would include, quote, no nuclear weapons for Iran. So the strikes are on pause. But Trump also made it very clear that the U.S. military remains locked and loaded if talks collapse. Now, we've seen this movie before. The threat of strikes forces Iran to the table. Iran shows up to the table. Iran stalls. Iran buys 3 more weeks. Rinse and repeat. But this time there's something different. You've got the leaders of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE personally involved as intermediaries. And those are not countries that throw their credibility around lightly. There's reportedly a 14-point memorandum of understanding being negotiated right now, possibly including a 30-day window on nuclear limits and sanctions relief. The sticking point, the thing Iran refuses to actually address, is the nuclear weapons question itself. Because Iran knows that if they give up the nuclear program, they lose the only leverage that keeps the regime alive. So what do instead? They reach for the next lever. They look at those cables on the seabed. And that is not a coincidence. That is a doctrine shift. Iran is expanding what they call their nuclear weapon. And they mean that literally, not figuratively. The Strait of Hormuz is their nuclear weapon. Controlling shipping is their nuclear weapon. And now threatening to cut, tax, or sabotage $10 trillion a day in global financial transactions is the next warhead in that same arsenal. This is a regime that has figured out that it doesn't need an actual bomb to hold the world hostage. It just needs enough choke points. And right now it's running out of conventional ones, so it's going underwater. Now let's know the enemy, because Sun Tzu said, know your enemy, know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So let's actually know this one. The platform most likely to be used against those undersea cables is the Ghadir-class submarine. And I'm going to give you the real numbers here because the cartoon version of this threat undersells it. The Ghadir is a diesel-electric submarine, 95 feet long, crew of 7, displacing about 125 tons submerged. It was originally developed from North Korean Yono-class designs. Yes, Iran bought submarine blueprints from Pyongyang in the early 2000s and then indigenously produced an entire fleet from them. Iran stealing foreign military technology. Truly, nobody saw that one coming. But before this war, Iran had somewhere between 16 and 23 of these things operational. U.S. assessments suggest they've lost roughly a dozen of them in 2026 operations, which still leaves approximately 10 potentially active, all of them assigned to the Southern Fleet at Bandar Abbas, 5 minutes from the Strait of Hormuz. Now here's why this platform matters specifically for the cable threat. The Strait of Hormuz is between 30 and 60 meters deep across most of its operational area. That is almost tailor-made for the Gadir because its sonar and sensor systems function properly in shallow water. They would be useless in deeper ocean. The Gadir carries two 533mm torpedo tubes capable of firing the Valfajr torpedo, a supercavitating weapon that travels on a bubble of air at speeds that make evasion practically impossible at close range. It can also launch the JASC-2 underwater-fired anti-ship cruise missile with claimed ranges of up to 100 nautical miles. Iran's number, so take that with some salt, but the capability is real. It can lay mines. And here's the part that nobody is talking about loudly enough. It can deploy combat divers. IRGC Navy Special Operations personnel trained specifically for underwater sabotage, whose entire mission set could include swimming down to a fiber-optic cable with equipment that fits in a dive bag and manually cutting it. No torpedo required, no explosion, no radar signature. Just a diver, a cable, and a pair of cutting tools. Former Iranian Navy Commander Rear Admiral Hossein Khazadi called the Gadir, quote, capable of doing what the U-boat did in World War II. Royal Navy Commander Ryan Ramsey, who captained the nuclear submarine HMS Turbulent in the Persian Gulf, said, and I'm paraphrasing here, these are tiny submarines, but they have enough torpedoes to sink ships. The Gadir's structural weakness is noise. It is significantly louder than modern submarines. Its crews have limited deep-water operational experience, and its North Korean engineering heritage means it carries some of those design limitations with it. But in shallow, acoustically cluttered water like the Persian Gulf, it doesn't need to be quiet, it just needs to be patient. And 7 IRGC sailors at the bottom of the strait with a $10 trillion cable running a few meters away from them have all the patience in the world. All right, let's get to the global roundup, because the world didn't pause while we were going underwater. First up, China's satellite espionage blitz against NATO is in full swing right now. 2 Chinese agents were just caught placing signal interception equipment near a French Starlink ground station, specifically targeting military satellite communications. Norwegian authorities separately arrested a Chinese national attempting to steal sensitive satellite data, and the NSA, alongside 19 international partner intelligence agencies, released a joint advisory warning that Chinese state-linked hackers have been systematically targeting commercial consumer devices to infiltrate adversary military networks, and they've been doing it since 2021. China is picking NATO's digital locks while publicly positioning itself as a neutral peacemaker on the Iran situation. Different theater, completely identical playbook. Next story, a Taiwanese F-16 went down during training operations off the coast of Hualien, spotlighting the brutal operational tempo Taiwan's Air Force is currently running. Simultaneously, PLA aircraft entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and there are reports of a malfunction during a Chinese drone swarm exercise, suggesting some real fractures inside the PLA's operational readiness. China will keep probing Taiwan's resolve, and as we saw at the recent summit, Taiwan is the #1 strategic objective on Beijing's board right now. Everything else, Iran, the Strait, the cables, is in service of that single long-term goal. Now let's talk about what the United States military actually does about those mini-subs, because defending seabed infrastructure from submarines operating in shallow, acoustically noisy water is genuinely hard, but the tools exist. Layer 1 is the P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft, a modified Boeing 737 that has been turned into a flying sensor array. Sonobuoys, magnetic anomaly detection, surface radars, signals intelligence, and the ability to prosecute targets directly. Its upgraded acoustic processing was essentially built to find exactly these kinds of small, shallow-water, diesel-electric submarines. P-8s have already been running operations around Bandar Abbas and Keshem Island, building the acoustic fingerprint of every subsurface contact in the strait. Layer 2 is the MH-60R Seahawk, operating off Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and carrier air wings. The Romeo variant carries dipping sonar and air-launched Mark 54 torpedoes. When you pair the P-8's wide-area acoustic picture with the MH-60R's precision engagement capability, you have a real targeting chain against these submarines. But Layer 3 is where this gets genuinely next level. Lockheed Martin unveiled the Lamprey in February 2026, 6 weeks before this war started, which in hindsight feels less like a coincidence and more like a capability announcement. The Lamprey is an extra-large, uncrewed undersea vehicle with no large propeller, a tapered hull, and soft vectored thrust, acoustically designed to disappear in shallow water. It doesn't chase submarines. It finds them, marks them, follows them back to their base, and passes targeting data up the chain to F-35s carrying JDAMs or F-15Es dropping 5,000-pound bunker busters on underground submarine pens built into the Iranian coastline. And running alongside the Lamprey is DARPA's Manta Ray, a wide wingspan unmanned undersea vehicle optimized for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Together, these systems create what I describe as an underwater metal net, a persistent, autonomous, acoustically invisible surveillance layer between the surface and the seabed that the IRGC has no answer for. And that brings us to the 4D chess section, because the undersea cable threat is not just a military problem, it's a financial one. And that changes the political calculus in ways that Iran may not have fully thought through. When Iran threatens the Strait of Hormuz, the victims are energy companies, shipping firms, governments. When Iran threatens to cut undersea cables carrying $10 trillion a day in transactions, the victims are Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon. Those are companies with more lawyers than Iran has soldiers, more lobbyists than Iran has diplomats, and more political influence in Washington than most sovereign nations. If a cable gets cut and $1 trillion of daily financial transactions goes dark, the pressure on the U.S. government to respond immediately and decisively will come not just from the Pentagon. It will come from every boardroom on Wall Street and every tech campus in Silicon Valley simultaneously. Iran may think that threatening the cables gives them more leverage. What it might actually do is unite every major American economic interest behind a military response in a way that nothing else in this conflict has managed to do yet. The IRGC hardliners pushing this doctrine may be right that it applies maximum pressure. They may be wrong about whether they can survive what comes next when they do. The targeting chain is built. The autonomous systems are in the water. And the question now is whether Iran's leadership is calculating the full cost of what they're threatening, or whether they're so focused on staying in power through the next 90 days that they can't see what happens in day 91. What do you think? Does Iran actually cut a cable? Does someone finally come to the table with something real? Drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and I try to get back to as many as possible in the first 2 hours after this drops. Follow me on X and Instagram. Links are in the description. And if you want the members-only deep dives and operational breakdowns, join the Ready Room. I'll see you on the next one. Signing off.